Welcome everybody. My name is Todd Benson, and I'm the Associate Director here at the Collaborative on Academic Careers in Higher Education. COACHE is a research practice partnership that's really focused on making the academic workplace more equitable and just generally better for faculty. And we do that by partnering with colleges and universities across the country with the intention of giving them the kind of data that will help inform their practice. Today, we're going to be talking in particular about the needs of part-time faculty. So let me start with some introductions here. Our presenters today are from the University of Buffalo, and they are Bob Granfield and Tilman Baumstark. I'm going to be moderating, but Bob and Tilman are really the folks that have been doing the work on the ground for this sort of thing. A little bit about both Bob and Tilman. They are both accomplished scholars in their particular field. Bob has been studying law and in particular has been the chair of the sociology department at Buffalo. He has written over 80 articles, book chapters, and reviews. He's been a visiting scholar really all over the world and has moved into this administrative leadership role here at Buffalo a few years ago. Tilman is the Associate Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs, and he comes from the microbiology background at Buffalo. And he's been working in faculty engagement initiatives and using data to drive decision-making about how to support and improve the work life for faculty. So thank you both for coming here, for being a part of this presentation. And actually, I just want to say thank you for the work that you put into this. We're presenting on something that really took a solid year of effort, probably more than a solid year of effort to put together. So the presentation, which is an hour, really is the culmination of a very committed and dedicated amount of resources and energy and time and thought. So thank you both for that. Why don't we start out by the two of you just giving us a little bit of context on kind of the rationale for the work that you did here. Was any sense of if there was some prior work done at Buffalo around this sort of thing? In other words, kind of what was the broader context for deciding to take this approach to understanding part-time faculty?
Sure, Todd. So the impetus of this really came out of kind of two sets of conversations to a certain extent. So when I took the position of Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs in the latter part of 2014, I really wanted to expand the office to do a lot more in the faculty engagement space. So that then began to force us to have conversations about not only ladder faculty, but also the wide range of faculty that we service here at the university. And we began developing programs for various faculty, some faculty development programs. We develop chair programs. Tilman and I run a chair training program every year now. So we really thought about the various ways that we could reach out to the faculty. So part of it was I would say the interest of our office. But then simultaneously there were more institutional-wide conversations beginning to happen about just understanding the teaching roles, particularly the teaching roles of the university, the various faculty titles, the distribution between tenure track and non-tenure track faculty, and how we understand that ratio. And so that led us into doing a series of presentations and institutional data analysis that included adjunct faculty. And this was all happening around the time of the COACHE survey, so that all kind of dovetailed nicely for us to begin thinking about, well, we do have institutional data for part-time faculty, but it's very limited. So when we did the COACHE, we began thinking about how could we take the format and framework of the COACHE and basically tweak it in a way that would be applicable for part-time faculty. And it was partially stimulated also by the fact that this was probably the first year. We did the COACHE in 2017. We had done it prior to that, as you know, Todd. But I think this was the first year in 2017 that we made the decision institutionally to include our full-time non-tenure track faculty, what we call our qualified ranks faculty. So when the COACHE data came out, we had data on our full-time non-tenure track faculty, but we really were lacking data on our part-time faculty. So that, I think, was the impetus for thinking about how we could use the COACHE to gather some information on the satisfaction and the experiences of part-time faculty.
So, kind of diving down into kind of your conceptual framework for how you thought about part-time faculty, I'm curious to know, you know, as you were developing this kind of parallel instrument to the COACHE instrument, what aspects of the instrument did you think were important to you? What kinds of factors played into the decision making about the kinds of questions to ask, that sort of thing?
So the survey was really sent out to 870 part-time faculty, and the definition of part-time was obviously less than 0.75 FTE. We did this in May. We gave about a month and did 3 reminders to the participants, and received about 230 respondents. 200 and something of those completed the entire survey. So we're in the range between 24 and 26% in the response rate. And it was really modeled after the COACHE that we applied in the same year, where we had 1,800 plus full-time faculty, out of which 551 were non-tenure track. So we had an idea coming from the COACHE that non-tenure track faculty, and everybody who's doing COACHE is familiar sort of with the readout that we're getting. When you compare to your peers in your cohort, the non-tenure track faculty were sort of in that mix, and they already gave us an idea how they might be different in their perceptions and their satisfaction than the latter faculty. And so based on COACHE, then we went through the whole catalog of survey questions and kept as much as we could, because we wanted to stay close to the COACHE instrument. So everything on the nature of work, which was sort of research, service, teaching, on resources, mentoring, general environment, we kept all of that. Obviously, we removed tenure track and questions that were specific to the latter faculty that made no sense to part-time faculty. And then we added or modified questions that were existing in the COACHE to really match what the part-time faculty experience would speak to. And that includes really their roles and responsibilities, what their teaching role was, how they interacted with international students was a question of that year that the Senate asked us to sort of include. And then integration of part-time faculty, sort of their specifics of employment. And then lastly, to their motivation. And Bob will speak to that in a little bit further in our talk.
Before we jump on to the next slide, though, I wanted to ask, there was a question from one of our guests in the room asking if you guys could give a little bit of a definition of the term ladder faculty. I think different institutions have different
terms. So when we're talking ladder faculty, we are talking tenure track tenured faculty. So we don't consider non-tenure track faculty, either full-time or part-time, as ladder faculty. So that's that 1,800 in the COACHE survey.
1290
and would be ladder, and a 1290 would be of the 1,800, 1,290 were the ladder faculty, right? So that's the tenure track tenured faculty.
Great. So diving into this to this next slide. One of the dimensions of the survey that you guys expanded on or really built from scratch was this idea about their motivation for being a part-time faculty. And one of the things that, the COACHE that we've really, tried to figure out is, how to incorporate this idea of why you are a part-time faculty member into our understanding and our analysis of those faculty. So just hoping you guys could talk a little bit about that and maybe kind of go through the thought process that you used for developing the buckets that you put these faculty into, kind of based on motivation.
Sure. So as Tilman mentioned, we did try to remain true to the COACHE survey. So the questions and the constructs that seemed applicable to part-time, we really tried to keep. But there were clearly questions that we had to ask in order to differentiate particularly their motivations for, basically their relationship to the university, their motivation for doing part-time work, and as well as their employment status. And I think these, we'll see in the analysis as we go through it, that these two factors are clearly very important in terms of understanding the adjunct population. So the reason why we came up with this, and we'll walk through the different categories in a moment, was that in the work that we had done, we preceded this study with conversations with the deans at all the various units. We have 12 different schools. Here we are the largest, most comprehensive university within New York State. So we have a medical school, we have law school, school of nursing, management, the full range really of canal units. And we spoke with each of the deans about the utilization of part-time faculty and how, and to get a sense of who their part-time faculty really are. So it became clear to us that there was this, the motivations or the different types of adjuncts that we had at the university were different across the different units. And so as Tilman and I began to analyze that data, as well as another survey that we had distributed, that Tilman will talk about in a moment, a survey that we call functionality survey, we began to identify these motivations, and as I said, that will become important. And we thought also the outside employment, whether or not they, are they working outside the university? What is the nature of their employment? Because clearly, with regards to part-time faculty, adjunct faculty, the narrative that I think is the most common narrative is the adjunct faculty member who maybe not really have a job outside of the university in the sense that they're piecing together various courses at universities in their area, and they may be teaching a large number of courses, but at different universities. So we felt it was necessary to understand really what the employment status of our adjuncts were, because clearly there are adjuncts that we have that are teaching in the professional schools who don't fit into that category. These are individuals who are employed in professional organizations outside the university and want to teach at the university to have a connection to the university or a sense of giving back to the university. So we thought that was important. We thought that the roles were also important. Most of the adjuncts are teaching, but we also found that some adjuncts are involved in doing service. Some adjuncts are involved in doing clinical work, again, because we have health sciences, big health sciences emphasis here at UB. So we really wanted to get a sense of what their role and responsibilities were. And I think the third thing that we added to the COACHE were the departmental experiences. Some of those questions were there already about mentoring. Certainly COACHE does a good job in asking mentoring questions, but we're really also interested in broader integration questions. How often they go to, are they invited to meetings? How often they participate in meetings? Are the meetings held at times that are convenient for them to go? Those kinds of things. So we took some of the COACHE items, but then we also added additional items I thought that would be related to the part-time experience.
Well, that's fantastic. So why don't we dig into some of the results and look at some of the things that you learned from the survey?
Wonderful, yes. So again, among the first sort of look that we took is sort of what do faculty do? And what Bob mentioned, the functionality study that we had started earlier, we had reached out to all the chairs and deans, and we kind of created a spreadsheet with all the employees in faculty positions and had asked every chair to sort of give us an idea of how they split their time and their efforts. And from that, and what kind of title they were in, and from that effort, it became very clear that all of them do a bit of everything. And so the results here showed us that while 71% said mostly teaching and 14% mostly clinical, some research, 95% of them all said that their work included some teaching. So obviously that was an important dimension of part-time faculty engagement. And so as we looked at the answers, we had asked some faculty to give us a reason why they joined faculty as a part-time member. And then we sort of looked through a lot of these responses and sort of grouped them into these 4 buckets that captured really the most different reasons and they can overlap, so people could check more than one box. So the big 4 groups are sort of graduate students who seek financial support. They're sort of maybe all about dissertation, or sort of towards the end of it, and then for them this is a major way of supporting themselves. Professionals in the field, 58%. This is a big group of our part-time faculty that some schools could not work without, obviously in the health sciences and medicine and dental and even in law.
Or management. These are individuals that might be working for a financial firm in which they're doing accounting. And so that's their primary job, but they come in to teach a course in our accounting department because they have that practical experience.
And then a group of faculty that really gave reason that they were trying to build their experience, grow their sort of engagement with the eye potentially of getting full-time employed at the university. So these are people who are maybe past their dissertation, may have a sort of a teaching gig here and there, but they're looking to sort of keep a foot in the door and one day maybe get full-time faculty. And then the last group was sort of people who are retired. They could be professional or academics, and they just come back because they love teaching and they love to give back, and then they love to stay active and connected to the university. The second dimension was the length of contract. There was a huge number of answers who said we have 1 semester contracts. And then the next sort of set that we found was a year or more or open-ended. So clearly that makes a difference for faculty, what their situation is. We asked, are you non-academically employed outside of UB? And that's about half and half. And then we asked whether they have other non-tenure track positions outside of UB, and about a fifth or so do. So that's people who might be teaching a course or so in any of the other universities.
I just want to jump in and say, that piece alone, I think, really adds a lot of context to understanding, what it is that your part-time faculty are experiencing, and so I just think this is, really phenomenal. Please keep going with the other parts, but I hope folks that are watching this really start to say, beyond asking any kind of 5-point Likert scale questions, just understanding why they're there and kind of what the terms of their the circumstances are really can be enlightening.
And just to follow up on that point, Todd, I think because of the comprehensiveness of UB, other universities may not be as comprehensive. So the fact that we have a law school and a school of management that are relying on professionals in the field and in the region to provide this really kind of expertise, oftentimes expertise that latter faculty really don't have. We might have an advantage in that sense. So other universities, if they're small or if they're predominantly liberal arts universities, they may not, their composition of adjunct faculty will no doubt look very different than a university like UB. But I think it is important because as we'll go through the data, as Tilman will lay it out, but I think that there's one narrative about who the adjunct is, and I think what this data does is to kind of complicate that story a little bit more, not to kind of undervalue or de-emphasize the importance of that one narrative, because I think it is an important story about the overworked adjunct trying to pull multiple universities together and teaching various courses and the difficulty with doing that. But that's really only one narrative.
Yeah. So in looking at our data and with sort of some schools having smaller numbers of part-time faculty than others, we were trying to find a way to get to reasonable numbers and be able to ask some questions without sort of identifying individual faculty in a particular department. And so we found that we had 3 of our schools and the College of Arts and Sciences, so Dental Medicine and the Graduate School of Education, who had sizable numbers of part-time faculty, and so we kind of kept them separate. So these are the biggest employers of part-time faculty, more than 100 each. We grouped 5 mid-sized units with each between 30 to 60 part-time faculty, and when we pooled them, kind of came sort of to a mid-sized pool of 214, and that included architecture, management, social work, and law. And then the rest of the smaller units, 7 small units, 26 part-time faculty or lower. You can see how that would be difficult to kind of answer questions individually. Pooled those and had then sort of a pool of small-sized units of 151. And that included medicine because we did not include a number of sort of geographical full-time faculty or so medicine is sort of a special case here, but engineering, nursing, pharmacy, and public health. And sort of when we applied our categories to sort of the numbers of just where people fell in terms of their reason for being a part-time faculty, you can see in sort of emboldened that, for example, in the College of Arts and Sciences, the majority of part-time faculty are there because they're graduate students looking for funding or because they're there to build their teaching experience. Versus, for example, the School of Dental Medicine, SDM, where the majority of part-time faculty are really the professionals who are there to kind of complement their work. And similarly, a number of those mid-sized units all fall under the category architectural law and management, where those professionals are in. So those distribute, the rationale distributes differently across the different units. And then similarly, when you look at the contract length, in some of the colleges, College of Arts and Sciences, Graduate School of Education, the majority of those receive 1 semester contracts versus dental, where faculty receive a year or longer contracts. So again, depending on the unit, your contract length is different, your reason is different, and you may or may not have employment outside UB. Again, in the Graduate School of Education, 2/3 of those do not have other employment, versus medicine, dental medicine, or some of the professional schools where the majority, yes, do have a job outside of UB. So our categories here really tell us that this is important to look at by the unit, and that you'll have different populations when you look at different schools in the college. And so one of those outcomes here is, for example, arts and sciences and education clearly have a very different population in contrast to the professional schools. They use more graduate students, they have fewer professionals from the field, they have a heavy emphasis on semester contracts, and the majority have no other employment outside UB. So that's clearly different from the professionals where they have jobs, they have longer contracts, and they're mostly professionals. There are some categories that come in where we have communalities. So for example, graduate students and those who look to build their teaching experience, all of them, majority get the short-term contracts, versus professionals and retirees apparently have received longer-term or open-ended contracts. And again, so it shows us that they're treated differently. They're not only different in what they're seeking, but also in how they get differential treatment from graduate students.
And it also may reflect the hiring needs. So if you are routinely hiring adjuncts from the community professionals, it's probably on a rotating basis where you're doing that, whereas if you're hiring a graduate student, for instance, in the arts and sciences and say sociology or English, it may be not on a regular basis. So maybe you're looking to fill certain courses because a faculty member has become ill or decided to go on sabbatical, and so the process, I think, by which the hire is made differs across each unit, which I think probably explains in part the contract.
So that being said, I think it'd be kind of interesting, and I don't know that your data gets there, but to think about when those folks are even hired. I would imagine kind of for these more quick fill positions, we might be putting grad students in to prep a course, with just a few weeks notice.
Absolutely.
And so what does that say for the student's learning experience in the classroom? What does it say for the kinds of supports that grad students might need in order to build a syllabus well? Those sorts of things can really have direct impact on the student learning experience.
Absolutely. I mean, there are pros and cons, as with everything. And, certainly one of the pros is that, students learn how to put together a course really quickly. So when they go on the job market, they may have opportunity, be able to tout that and have, lots of experiences in the classroom putting together lots of classes. The downside of that is that, absolutely, if you're doing a lot of teaching, we'll talk about this down the road, but if you're doing a lot of teaching, it may delay the time to graduation. If it is intense, what we hear from some of our adjuncts is that they are asked to teach a course, but there's no guarantee that that course will run. So they prepare the course, and then if it's significantly under-enrolled, doesn't meet a specific number of students, it may be canceled at the last minute. So you have students who have put time and effort into preparing a class that ultimately ends up that they don't teach it. So that I think can be very frustrating and really a kind of a time sink, and that time that is not compensated.
So we tried to look deeper into the data, and what the beauty of the COACHE is that, as you probably all know, is that you have the comparison groups. You have your peer group that you determine, you have the cohort that you can, so it gives you a comparison to other institutions and to sort of determine where strengths and concerns your institution might lie for your full-time faculty. With our in-house survey, we did not have, obviously, these comparisons. We neither had peer nor cohort data at that time. And so we had to come up with a way of saying what should we be focusing on, what are strengths and concerns within this group at UB. And so we came up with a point that is obviously arbitrary in that we said, well, let's collapse a 5-point Likert scale into 3. And really look at something, you're either dissatisfied, you're neutral, or satisfied, you agree with a statement, and you're neutral, or you don't agree, and then see whether we can kind of get a ratio between the satisfied and the dissatisfied. And the background is sort of thinking of a population. If you have some discontent, it normally doesn't spill over, sort of any group can tolerate a sort of a certain amount of discontent, but if the group rises, or the percentage rises to a certain level, then these voices of discontent become very loudly heard, even though they may still be in a minority. So 20% of unhappy folks can make a lot, so to speak, can make a lot of noise, right? And so we use this ratio of satisfied to dissatisfied to identify strengths and concerns. And again, with some arbitrary cutoff that came from just looking at our data itself and see what makes sense. We said that anything where we have a satisfied to dissatisfied ratio of 4-to-1 or higher, we would think that's a strength. And if it's 6-to-1 or higher, then it would be a significant strength. And anything where this ratio falls below 2.5 of satisfied to dissatisfied, we would begin to consider that a concern. And if it falls below 2-to-1, satisfied to dissatisfied, we really thought this is a significant concern that we need to look into. And with that lens, so just as an example here of a number of analyses that we did, looking at several questions regarding teaching satisfaction.
And these are COACHE questions.
Exactly. And so you can see at the question title is sort of shown on the right here. Number of courses taught is high ratio of satisfied, that's a strength. The level of courses the part-time faculty are very happy, 10-to-1. The discretion over the course content, 12-to-1. So these are all dimensions where the part-time faculty are extremely happy. And then you can see then sort of where the ratio goes down, the number of students per class, the quality of students, minor strength, minor concerns, and the support for improving teaching. So in the teaching area, actually quite a level of satisfaction. And then sort of another example of where you see more of the concerns, we looked at support, resources, salary, benefits. There's a number of more questions than that, but these are compiled here. With office space, the ratio is 1.3 to 1, so this is a strong concern. The salary, 0.7 to 1, is a strong concern. The opportunity for collaborations at UB at the bottom, sort of almost 1 to 1, that is a strong concern. At the same time, support, tech support, administrative support are still significant strengths. And so with this, so that these are just examples, with this we went through the entire catalog of our questions and asked sort of where are some areas of concern and where areas of strength.
So similar to what COACHE is able to do is to identify a list of strengths and concerns that that an institution could use to actually lean into to either enhance if they're strengths or to somehow maybe adjust policy or to think about allaying some of those concerns. So here we have, in terms of the strengths, again, based on the ratios that Tilman just outlined, we have a number of strengths that part-time faculty feel at the University of Buffalo. So the number and level of courses taught, there's satisfaction with that, the access they have to courses. The quality of students in the classes, so they are appreciative, they are satisfied. And this is pretty much, I mean, we'll see in a moment, we do try to differentiate, but these are kind of global at this point. The discretion over course content. So even though they may be assigned courses, they still certainly believe they have discretion over the content, the time that they spend with teaching. They're highly satisfied with some of the administrative services, the computing services, technical services, clerical and administrative support, as well. Interestingly, and I find this very positive in many ways. That the chair, they feel that they are treated fairly by the chair and evaluating their work. So in some ways that's to a certain extent a measure maybe of integration, but they feel at least the chair is paying attention to them, and that the department treats them as a colleague, again, a kind of quasi measure of integration within the departments. Some of the areas of concern, however, as you might imagine with adjuncts, I think there are lots of issues that they identify. This equity of teaching load, I think we're also seeing that with regards to non-tenure track full-time faculty who do teach more than our research faculty. And that sometimes can cause a certain degree of animus within a department. Some groups are teaching more than other groups just because of the nature of their status, and I think intellectually people might understand it, but when push comes to shove and at an emotional level they see someone teaching less than they are, and so there's some sense of equity that I think is implicit in this kind of question. The support for improving teaching, somewhat of an issue. Actually, that was an issue across the board, and we'll talk about in a moment, because one of the things that we did at the University of Buffalo was to really, because of the COACHE survey and our part-time survey, we have allocated a significant amount of resources to our Center for Educational Innovation. So other concerns we see is opportunity to participate in departmental meetings, which again is somewhat of a measure of integration, maybe on the negative side. We see the sense of recognition for their teaching efforts. There's some concern about that, maybe perhaps not necessarily from the chair, but maybe from the department or maybe from the university. The sense that an adjunct comes in and they do their good work, but they're not necessarily recognized by the department or the university for the work that they're doing. Ability to collaborate outside the department. There's a lot of we do a lot of interdisciplinary work here, and there is a lot of collaboration. In fact, in our COACHE survey, collaboration came out as a strong strength at the university. But among our part-time faculty, there's not as much of that opportunity to participate in collaboration cross-decanally or cross-disciplinary way. So that's somewhat of a concern. Mentoring comes out as a real concern, perhaps not surprising, even though we have a mentoring policy that specifies that all departments have to have a mentoring program, and all faculty, regardless of their status, have to be afforded mentoring opportunities. There's a difference between policy and practice, right? So we have the policy, and the practice may not necessarily always be followed. Salary, not surprising, with adjuncts salary across. This is a kind of an industry issue where adjuncts are paid by the class and by the course, and typically is pretty low. In the contract, Tilman was talking about the contract renewal process and the criteria not very clear. So these are some of the concerns that our part-time faculty had.
And so what we tried to do next was sort of to again come back to sort of these are overall concerns and overall strengths. Can we break this down by those categories that we identified, basically these different populations of part-time faculty, and see whether those come out in a different or in a differential way?
And in some ways, we were taking the lead of COACHE, because on the COACHE analysis, COACHE does a nice job of breaking down these various groups, so we can understand how a full professor feels, or how the group of associate professors feel, or how the group of pre-tenured faculty feel, so forth and so on. So in a sense, our effort to do this was in some way inspired certainly by COACHE's own analysis.
And so these are just a few examples that I want to quickly sort of show. When we looked at, for example, the teaching satisfaction, and a few questions here, the quality of students, the support the institution has offered you overall, they came out very positive. But when you broke it down by the motivation to be faculty, then graduate students and those trying to enhance their teaching experience were decidedly less satisfied, I've marked them in red, than the professionals and the retirees. And that kind of held through every single dimension of teaching, where the graduate students felt like their support wasn't as good, the equitability of the teaching workload wasn't sort of great. So clearly these two categories feel differently about teaching, even though teaching overall was considered a strength at the university. Another example, we obviously had gender information, URM status, and those kind of things, and sometimes it made a difference, as in this example here for office space, where surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, non-URMs are less satisfied with the space they're being provided than the minority that may be sort of whatever. But gender in this particular question made no big difference, and so a lot of times male, female felt the same about issues. But you can see again, length of contract felt different about office space. If you only had a one semester, you were less satisfied than if you had a year or more. Maybe you did get provided different space. But if you were not employed outside UB, that space meant more to you than if you had a job outside. Then this wasn't as much maybe a status symbol or
just a place to work.
Yeah, it's a necessity. And so last example here in this, for example, the salary information, again, sort of it's a big concern overall, not so much by the length of contract, but again, of course, if you have another job outside UB, it's less a concern than if you don't. Obviously, now your salary really, really matters. The same if you look for the rationale for being a faculty. Yes, if you're a graduate student and you're doing this to support yourself, absolutely, the salary is sort of a hugely important piece. And if you're a retiree who's looking to give back to the community, they were quite happy that they get possibly paid anything at all. So again, sort of these different motivations frame the perception or what is important, what is a priority to you as a faculty. And so with this, we looked at just sort of a few examples of, for example, department life. How concerned are you about being able to participate in department meetings? It congregates or it correlates with having a short contract, not having another job outside of UB, and being a graduate student is seeking teaching experience. So they would really want to be part of it, and sometimes they can't, and it matters a lot. When you look at when the department meetings are being held, does that meet your needs? Well, now it matters more that you have another job outside UB, and the times the department meeting is, you're doing your professional work elsewhere. So it's clearly, again, sort of your motivation and your economic situation outside of UB matters how you frame the priority of these questions. And so mentoring is another example. Sort of overall, the lowest reported rate of receiving mentoring was for those who have one semester contracts, but also those who are retired or professional in the field. We're not providing them with mentoring, apparently, to the degree that we should. However, if you ask how important is receiving mentoring outside the department to you, then you come back to the graduate students and those seeking a teaching experience, because yes, they want to be mentored, not just in the department, but really outside as well. So these are areas where we found that really it distributes differentially across the units.
I'm curious, if jumping back to that previous slide, if you were to ask those retired professionals in the field about mentoring, I wonder, it sounds like they're not satisfied with it. I wonder if there's a perception within the department that it's not needed.
It may very well be the case, and they wouldn't know how to do it necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an issue. We're talking in a moment about some of the policy implications that we are looking at as a result of this data. Oftentimes tenure-track faculty or tenured faculty, they may not necessarily have the background in order to provide the mentoring the mentoring needs, provide for the mentoring needs for faculty that are not like them, right? So at a place like University of Buffalo, which is heavily research-based, they, for someone who's a professional working in the community or has had a career in the community, they may not necessarily know how to work with that, but they may not necessarily be able to relate. So right, there is challenge, and we're having that conversation here, even with regards to our non-tenure track full-time faculty. Clinical faculty, what are the mentoring needs of clinical faculty? Well, sometimes tenure track faculty may not be able to provide for those mentoring needs of clinical faculty.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that I can envision circumstances where, just looking at COACHE data for the past few years, we didn't used to think that associates even needed mentoring. We used to think, well, once you get tenure, you're all mentored up. It's time for you to go mentor somebody else.
Right.
But it's this kind of reflection on the full career span that I think is really the emerging conversation right now about how we support and develop faculty.
I think that's right, Todd. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and so a sort of a summary of our presentation today, it really is adjuncts are a very diverse population of part-time faculty, and you cannot just talk about adjuncts through that single lens or address their needs through like one approach. Excuse me. So the motivation for seeking the adjunct position and the economic background that you have, that really drives what you perceive as your needs, what you expect from your employer, what would you like to see, what makes you sort of happy as a part-time faculty. So if you're without an academic job or with a non-academic job outside UB, and if you're in retirement, you're much more satisfied with a range of experience. We found overall this is a happier population than graduate students, excuse me, and those postgraduates who are looking to build a portfolio. And at the same time, the varied length of contract experiences is very differential in regard to different part-time faculty and in regard to integration into department life. And so oftentimes if you're semester-to-semester contracts, if you're a graduate student in a teaching position or trying to enhance your teaching, they overall felt much less integrated or recognized for their efforts. So these two subgroups clearly look at part-time employment in a different way. And then sort of the final outcome sort of from this, obviously sort of the composition really, really varies, so it's not homogeneous across the entire university. So when you talk about graduate student issues as adjunct faculty. In our case, for example, you'd really have to look at the College of Arts and Sciences as a major employer of graduate students, and not sort of talk as a university about that situation. This may really be a unit discussion to have, how to sort of enhance their experience. But yeah, so what we also found was sort of a high degree of commonality. All really found that the contract renewal issue sort of that needed our eyes, sort of the knowing what the conditions were, knowing what the criteria were, knowing what the timing of renewal was, that we can really sort of, we find we have to do a better job. And at the same time, mentoring, only 15% of part-time faculty report being mentored. This is clearly an area where we have to find ways to do better. All groups would rate mentoring as important. So,
we don't want to spend too much time. There may be questions that the participants have, the audience has, but just a few outcomes that we've thought about in terms of the data here. So I think one of the ways that this has contributed to our understanding of faculty needs and how we are thinking about faculty at UB, one is in the area of resources. So I mentioned a while ago that we have increased our opportunities for teaching, development of teaching. So we have a Center for Educational Innovation that now we have an academy within academy. So we have these faculty academies that we run through my office in scholarship, but also in teaching. And many of the faculty who have been participating in these teaching academies have been adjunct faculty. So we don't exclude adjunct faculty from this. So adjuncts are taking some benefits. So part of the trying to contribute to the professional development of all faculty, including our adjunct faculty. There has been some discussion about, I think, contract length. SUNY, we are limited to a certain extent in the kind of the lengths of contracts that we can provide, but I think we have had conversations about that. It also has opened up a conversation, I think, about, and again, this gets to the composition of our faculty. That when it comes to issues of investments in professional development, opportunities for integration, there's perhaps more opportunities if it's a full-time faculty position. So the number of our adjuncts, particularly our graduate students that we employ, is on the decline as we have kind of begun to move to more of a model of hiring full-time adjuncts who are actually full-time non-tenure track faculty. And some of those faculty have been previously employed as adjuncts and maybe teaching on a course-by-course basis, who have now been employed, say, in the College of Arts and Sciences to teach 5 or 6 courses a year with a guaranteed salary, with health benefits, with opportunities to participate in the department, with an office, with much more integration. And so it, in some way, with a promotion track. So if you come in as there are non-tenure track titles that have promotion tracks to them, a clinical assistant professor, a clinical associate professor, a clinical full professor. So it actually provides for more security, I think. I think it provides for more of a professional experience as opposed to teaching on a course-by-course basis. We'll always have need for that, for faculty to teach on a course-by-course basis, but it's really gotten us to think about what are those courses. So the professional in the community coming in to teach in the law school, or to teach in the School of Nursing, or to teach in the School of Management, those courses will continue to be hired, will continue to hire adjunct for their specific expertise. And I said a while ago, they have expertise that faculty may not necessarily have. But maybe other courses that are at a different level that could be that could be handled by one individual, but teaching multiple courses, increase their salary, offer health benefits, more security, and more participation within the university, I think it's a gain for the individual as well as for the university.
Related to that, a question popped up from Lisa. The question she asked was, what's a typical course load for a full-time adjunct at Buffalo?
A full-time non-tenure track faculty, and it varies across the university. I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences. That's where my home department is, and typically it's I think it varies, but maybe between 5 or 6 courses a year. So the standard course load for a tenured faculty member in the College of Arts and Sciences, and again it varies across the university. But in the College of Arts and Sciences, it's typically 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring. But that's because there's a heavy research dimension to it. So the idea is that we don't expect these full-time faculty they're not being evaluated necessarily on their research contributions. So their work productivity is based primarily on their teaching. So the amount of teaching goes up. But you're going to begin to imagine how that could cause some tensions, right? They see themselves as teaching more, tenure track faculty or tenured faculty teaching less because they have research obligations. And while people intellectually may understand the differences, nonetheless they see a discrepancy. They do see a discrepancy, and I think there is a challenge at all universities in how we integrate. At what level do we integrate our tenure track and our tenured faculty with our non-tenure track faculty, full-time or part-time? And I think that's a continuous struggle and a continuous issue that we in this industry really need to think about. We talk a lot about the precarious nature of our non-tenure track faculty, and to a certain extent that's right. And I think we need, and it's not always simply about salary. Part of it is salary, certainly, but it's also opportunities for integration, the ways in which the university can invest in people to make them better teachers, to integrate them into the university so that they have a satisfying experience, or they are gaining skills that they can, kind of transfer to other places, maybe as more of on a full-time basis.
I just it's something that occurred to me as you were talking, that there's also economies for department chairs. Is it easier to hire one person to teach 3 courses a semester, or hire 3 people, each semester? And then there's kind of the onboarding and kind of the management of those folks, and that's got to be part of the case to make for kind of rolling some of these part-time appointments into a full-time appointment.
I think you're right. I think that's a very good point, and these are some of the exact conversations that we're having here at UB.
All right, so we've got just a few minutes left. I want to see if anybody has any questions to chime in with. It looks like Eve is asking, did you collect any data on adjunct demographics background? And if so, how does it compare with the demographics of your full-time faculty?
I don't have the comparison to the full-time faculty right there, but it is sort of, I think it is pretty much respectively close to what the full-time looks. So it's about half and half male female, 9% underrepresented minority.
Where's the 9%? Yeah, if we look, I think that's probably close to the faculty demographics. I mean, like a lot of places, we struggle. It may be in the underrepresented minority group. It may be easier to attract part-time labor than it is to attract full-time tenure track. We struggle here at the university. We talk a lot about, and this is not just UB. I think it's across the industry. What is the pool for underrepresented minority faculty, and how do we increasingly get access to that pool so we get more applications, and how do we increase our rates of hiring and as importantly, rates of retention with regards to underrepresented minority faculty. Since much of the part-time hiring tends to be local, So when we hire our faculty, it's typically a national search, obviously, much like most universities. But when we hire our part-time faculty, it very frequently is a local. These are local individuals working in the community, or they're graduate students or retirees. So there might be some. We might actually have an easier time recruiting part-time underrepresented minority faculty, which is not certainly. I mean, it's good that we're getting part-time, but we also need to do. We struggle with the recruiting and retaining underrepresented minority faculty.
All right. Well, it looks like we're just about out of time, so I just want to take one more second to say thank you to Bob and Tilman. This was really, really informative. Not just the work you put into the presentation, but the work you're putting into supporting part-time faculty. It's very commendable. Thank you guys all very much, and we'll stay on for a couple more minutes in case any other questions pop up.
Great. Thank you, Todd and Lauren, for organizing this and for everyone who participated.
Thank you so much.